As useful as the other kinds of sizing are that we'll be talking about in this chapter, pixels are fundamental. So we're going to start with those, and we'll also briefly mention another kind of sizing element or a measure called the point. So what is a point, Lee, and why might you want to know about it?
Well, a pixel, if we're being technical here, a pixel is defined as 1/96th of an inch, and a point is 1/72nd of
Hmm.
an inch. In reality, because of different pixel densities and all that sort of stuff, it doesn't really work out that way. So, one person's inch on the screen is different than another person's inch. But the point came over from the world of print design, and it is a valid unit that you can use, but people just tend to not use it.
Okay, so it's the kind of thing where you can sort of look for it. If you
Yeah,
see it in
exactly. If you
someone
see
else's
if you see
code, then know what it
PT,
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you see PT instead of PX, that's a point.
Okay, but we're not going to be using points in this tutorial, right?
Right. And the point is that both of these are absolute units, meaning they are telling the browser to color in a certain number of squares,
Right.
and it's hard coded, just that number of squares.
Okay, that seems like it's still a useful thing to be able to do, but apparently there are some people who think that you should basically never use pixels.
So right, this is where holy wars start, that sort of thing. A lot of people have kind of taken an attitude of, well, we should just never use pixels now because all these screens have different relative sizes and different densities. And so they say things like, we should be using different relative units for all of them. But you know what? There are times where you want something to display a certain way to a majority of users, whether that's your mobile users or your desktop users. And sometimes you just want to use a pixel. I mean,
Hmm.
sometimes it just makes sense. Like, if it might be something where the font size could be changing in it and you don't want like your margins and padding, this is something we'll get into in a little bit, but if you don't want the margins and padding to be changing with the font size, then sometimes it's good to use an absolute size that will lock that sizing down.
All right, let's take a look at our sample application here. And let's take a look at a couple of things where we can use pixels. Um, First of all, we're going to change this H2 here. I'm going to change the size of the font. So it's like this. And let's make it 30 pixels and see what that does, just to give us a sense of the sizing. Refresh it. Oh, made it a little bigger. So this is one possible use for pixels. Is this a recommended practice, Lee? Do you like to use pixels for font sizes or not?
It depends.
Okay, like
Ultimate,
so many things in CSS, that's a theme, I think, of the
yeah,
tutorial, isn't it?
exactly. It depends on so much. It's hard to say until you actually see the usage. If you're coming from a world where you spent a lot of time designing in Photoshop, sometimes it helps to use these kind of units because the sizing will make sense to you, and so you can intuitively just pick things up. But it depends.
Right. But so we'll mainly be using other measures for font sizes throughout the rest of this tutorial, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a good example though, just to see how we can change the font size using pixels. And let's look at another example. We just as kind of offhand, as an aside, change the width at some point. So let's look at another example of that. This is the width of the bio box here. And let's take a look at what happens if we make this 200 pixels. So it's pretty squished here. So this just gives us an intuitive sense. This is 200 pixels across on this particular device, right?
Right.
All right, we've got two examples here. We've got the H2 with the font size and then the width here. But as we'll see later on in this tutorial, in neither of these cases do we really want to use pixels. This is just to get an intuition for how they work. But There are some cases where you definitely do want to use pixels, Lisa. What's a good example of that?
Yeah, one of them that's mentioned in the text is that when you're selling advertising space, you're often selling a specific size ad,
Right.
and you want it to be exactly that size. So this is a an ad that is a standard ad size that you might see on a lot of websites.
Hmm.
It's 728 pixels wide by 90 pixels high, and if it were a different size, you would want a different amount of money for it. So you want to sell exactly the amount of pixels that you say you're going to sell. So that's when you'd use, hard, absolute figure like pixels.
All right.